I never thought a pile of firewood would land me in the middle of the most absurd legal battle of my life. But here, we are in suburban Colorado Springs, where the Pine Valley Homeowners Association has apparently decided that property rights are merely suggestions. My name is Nathan Garrison, and I have been living in this neighborhood for 6 years now. I bought my house specifically because of the 2 acres of wooded land that came with it, mostly populated with beautiful ponderosa pines and Douglas firs. The previous owner had warned me about the HOA being somewhat strict, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold with Patricia Henderson, the HOA president who embodied every negative stereotype about middle-aged women on power trips. It started innocently enough last October when I decided to have some dead trees removed from my property. A nasty windstorm the previous spring had damaged several trees beyond recovery, and my arborist recommended taking them down before they became hazardous. I hired a professional tree removal company, and instead of having them haul away all the wood, I asked them to cut it into manageable pieces and stack it on my property. I had plans to season the wood over the winter and use it in my fireplace the following year. Plus, I had been thinking about getting a wood-burning stove for my garage workshop. The tree removal took 3 days, and by the end of it, I had an impressive stack of firewood neatly arranged along the far edge of my property, near the tree line. We are talking about roughly 4 cords of wood, which represented about 8 trees. The removal company did an excellent job, even wrapping the stacks with tarps to protect them from moisture. I was pretty pleased with myself, thinking I had solved my heating needs for at least 2 winters while clearing dangerous deadwood from my land. That is when Patricia showed up. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in my garage organizing some tools when I heard the distinctive clip of high heels on my driveway. I looked up to see Patricia marching toward me with that particular expression I had come to recognize over the years, the one that said she had found something new to complain about. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, despite the overcast weather, and carrying her ever-present leather-bound planner. "Nathan, we need to talk about your wood situation," she announced without preamble, not even bothering with a greeting. I set down the wrench I was holding and wiped my hands on a rag. "My wood situation? You mean the firewood from my trees? It is an eyesore," she declared, gesturing dramatically toward my neatly stacked wood. "Several neighbors have complained. It is lowering property values and violating the aesthetic standards outlined in Section 12 of the HOA Covenant." I had read the HOA covenants when I bought the house, and I was pretty sure there was nothing in there about firewood. "Patricia, the wood is on my property. It is neatly stacked and it is covered. I do not see how that violates anything." She pulled out her planner and flipped through several pages with aggressive efficiency. Section 12. Subsection 4 clearly states that no homeowner shall store materials visible from the street that detract from the neighborhood's appearance. Your firewood is visible from Maple Ridge Road. "Barely," I countered. "You would have to deliberately look through my property to even notice it, and it is temporary. I am seasoning it for use." Patricia removed her sunglasses and fixed me with a cold stare. "Temporary or not, it needs to be dealt with. I am prepared to offer you a solution. Since you clearly have more wood than one person could possibly use, I suggest you donate half of it to be distributed among the neighbors. There are several households that would appreciate free firewood, and it would solve your storage problem." I actually laughed, thinking she was joking. "Patricia, that is my wood from my trees. I paid to have them removed. I am not donating it to anyone." Her expression hardened. Then you are going to receive a violation notice from the HOA, and you will be fined $50 per day until the issue is resolved. You cannot be serious. This is ridiculous. The HOA board meets on Tuesday. I suggest you come prepared to discuss a resolution, or the fines will begin on Wednesday. She put her sunglasses back on and turned to leave, then paused. And Nathan, I would think carefully about being uncooperative. The board has the authority to place liens on properties for unpaid fines. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my garage, completely baffled. I immediately went inside and pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants. I spent the next 2 hours reading through every section, and nowhere could I find anything that would justify her claim. Section 12 dealt with things like not parking commercial vehicles in driveways and maintaining lawn standards. The subsection she cited was about not leaving trash or construction debris visible from the street. Firewood was neither trash nor construction debris. It was a natural resource that I had legally harvested from my own property. That evening, I called my neighbor Tom Chen, who had lived in Pine Valley for over a decade and had served on the HOA board years ago before Patricia took over. Tom was a retired engineer with a pragmatic approach to life and little patience for bureaucratic nonsense. "Patricia is threatening to fine you over firewood," Tom repeated, sounding incredulous. "That woman has completely lost her mind. Last year she tried to fine the Johnsons because their Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white. So this is normal behavior for her. Unfortunately, yes. She became HOA president 3 years ago, and it has been a power trip ever since. Half the neighborhood cannot stand her, but no one wants to run against her because being on the HOA board is essentially a thankless volunteer job. She is the only one willing to put in the time, mainly because she thrives on the authority." "Can she actually fine me for this?" Tom sighed. "Technically, the HOA board can issue fines for covenant violations, but they have to prove there is actually a violation. Your firewood situation does not sound like a violation to me. My advice: show up to the meeting on Tuesday, bring your copy of the covenants, and challenge her interpretation. If the other board members are reasonable, they will side with you." I thanked Tom and spent the weekend alternating between anger and disbelief. The more I thought about it, the more absurd the situation became. I had done everything by the book. I had hired licensed professionals, cleaned up the debris, and stored the wood neatly on my own property. The idea that this somehow violated neighborhood standards was laughable. Tuesday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center where HOA meetings were held. The meeting room was a bland space with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia occupied the center position, flanked by 2 other board members. Greg Marshall, a soft-spoken accountant in his 50s, and Linda Wu, a middle-aged woman who taught at the local elementary school. About 15 residents had shown up for the meeting, which was apparently a larger turnout than usual. Word had spread about the firewood controversy, and people were curious. I spotted Tom in the back row, who gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order and quickly ran through some standard business about neighborhood landscaping contracts and the upcoming holiday decoration contest. Then she got to what she called new business. Item 4 on tonight's agenda concerns a property standards violation at 847 Maple Ridge Road, the residence of Nathan Garrison. She looked directly at me. "Mr. Garrison is storing an excessive amount of firewood on his property in a manner that is visible from the street and detracts from the neighborhood aesthetic. This is a clear violation of Section 12, subsection 4 of our covenants. I raised my hand. I would like to address that. Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. You may approach the board. I walked to the front and held up my copy of the covenants. I have read Section 12, subsection 4 multiple times, and it specifically refers to trash and construction debris. My firewood is neither. It is neatly stacked, covered, and barely visible from the street. I do not believe this constitutes a violation. Greg Marshall leaned forward, looking genuinely interested. How much firewood are we talking about? About 4 cords from trees I had professionally removed from my property. I am seasoning it for personal use. Linda Wu spoke up. That sounds reasonable. I am not sure I see the issue here, Patricia. Patricia's jaw tightened. The issue is that it looks unsightly and multiple neighbors have complained. Which neighbors? I asked. I would like to know who complained. That information is confidential, Patricia snapped. Tom stood up from the back. As a former board member, I can tell you that the board cannot issue fines without clearly demonstrating a covenant violation. Nothing in our rules prohibits storing firewood on your own property. Several other residents murmured in agreement. One elderly man named Harold spoke up. I've got a wood pile twice that size behind my shed. Are you going to fine me too? Patricia looked flustered, realizing she was losing control of the room. This is different. Nathan's wood is visible from the street. So is Harold's if you walk 50 feet down the sidewalk, Tom countered. Greg Marshall cleared his throat. Patricia, I think we need to table this issue. I am not comfortable voting to issue fines when the violation is unclear. Patricia's face flushed red. Fine, we will table it for now, but Nathan, I am strongly suggesting you consider reducing the amount of wood you have stored. It is a courtesy to your neighbors. Noted, I said flatly, returning to my seat. The meeting concluded shortly after, and several neighbors approached me to express their support. Harold clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do not let her bully you. She tried to fine me last year for having a vegetable garden she claimed was too visible. I told her where she could stick her fines." I left the meeting feeling somewhat vindicated, but I had a nagging suspicion this was not over. Patricia Henderson did not strike me as someone who backed down easily. I was right. 2 weeks later, on a cold November morning, I was inside working from home when I glanced out my window and saw something that made my blood boil. Patricia was on my property, loading wood from my stack into the back of her SUV. I ran outside without even grabbing a jacket. "What the hell are you doing?" she turned, completely unfazed. "I am collecting firewood that you refuse to donate. Since you have more than you need and it is causing a neighborhood issue, I am redistributing it to residents who could use it." "That is theft. You are stealing my property." "I am resolving an HOA issue. If you have a problem with it, take it up with the board." She loaded 3 more pieces of wood and slammed her tailgate shut. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I am documenting this. You just stole my property." Patricia actually smiled at the camera. "I am the HOA president acting within my authority to maintain neighborhood standards. I will have a receipt of collection sent to you." She drove away, leaving me standing in the cold, shaking with anger. I immediately went inside and called the police non-emergency line. An officer arrived about 40 minutes later, and I explained the situation while showing him the video footage. The officer, a young guy named Rodriguez, watched the video and shook his head. "Sir, technically this is theft, but because it is a civil dispute involving your HOA, we would recommend you handle it through civil court. You can file a report, but the county attorney likely would not prosecute a case like this. So she can just steal my property and face no consequences." I did not say that. I said criminal prosecution is unlikely. But you have clear evidence of her taking your property without permission. A civil lawsuit would be your best option. You could sue for the value of the stolen wood plus damages. After Officer Rodriguez left, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to calm down. I had never sued anyone in my life, but Patricia had crossed a line. This was not about the firewood anymore. It was about principle. If she could steal my property and claim it was HOA business, what would stop her from doing it to other neighbors? I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Rebecca Stone, and she specialized in property disputes and HOA cases. I met with her that afternoon at her office in downtown Colorado Springs, a sleek modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. Rebecca was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and direct. She watched my video 3 times, taking notes, then leaned back in her chair. This is pretty clear-cut theft. The fact that she is HOA president does not give her the right to take your property. How much wood did she take? Hard to say exactly, but based on the size of her SUV, probably a quarter cord. The wood is worth maybe $200, but I am more concerned about the principle. Understood. Here is what I recommend. We file a civil suit against her personally for theft and trespassing. We also name the HOA as a defendant because she claims she was acting in her capacity as president. We sue for the value of the wood, the cost of replacing it, punitive damages, and legal fees. How much are we talking? The wood itself is not worth much, but the trees it came from are. When someone destroys or steals timber from your property, Colorado law allows you to sue for 3 times the value of the trees, not just the wood. Those trees had value as standing timber, and she essentially stole part of that value. I had not thought about it that way. So we could actually claim significant damages, potentially. I would need to have an arborist assess the value of the trees that were removed to produce that firewood. Mature trees can be worth thousands of dollars each. Even if the trees were dead or damaged, they still had value as wood. We are looking at a potential claim in the tens of thousands. I authorized Rebecca to proceed, and she got to work immediately. Within a week, Patricia Henderson and the Pine Valley Homeowners Association were served with a lawsuit in El Paso County District Court. The suit claimed theft, trespassing, and conversion of property, seeking $50,000 in damages. The neighborhood exploded with gossip. Tom called me that evening, barely able to contain his amusement. "You actually sued her. This is fantastic. She has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, and someone finally stood up to her. I did not want it to come to this, but she literally stole from me. No, you are absolutely right, and between you and me, I think this is going to shake things up around here. A lot of people are fed up with her antics." The HOA held an emergency meeting the following week, which I did not attend but heard about from multiple sources. Patricia tried to claim she had acted appropriately, but Greg Marshall and Linda Wu were furious. They pointed out that she had exposed the HOA to significant legal liability by acting unilaterally. There was talk of removing her as president, but the bylaws required a vote of all homeowners, not just the board, and that would take time to organize. Meanwhile, Patricia hired her own lawyer, and the legal wheels began turning. Discovery started, which meant both sides had to exchange evidence and documentation. Rebecca subpoenaed HOA records, meeting minutes, and all communications related to my firewood situation. What we found was illuminating. It turned out Patricia had never actually received complaints from neighbors about my firewood. She had made that up. The meeting minutes showed that she had unilaterally added my supposed violation to the agenda without discussing it with the other board members first. Furthermore, we discovered that Patricia had a history of similar behavior. Over the past 3 years, she had issued questionable fines to at least 8 different homeowners, mostly for minor issues that were not clearly covered by the covenants. Rebecca also hired a certified arborist to assess the value of the trees I had removed. His report was detailed and thorough. Even though the trees were dead or damaged, they still had significant value as standing timber and habitat. The arborist calculated that each tree was worth approximately $3,000 in various factors, including wood value, carbon sequestration, and property aesthetics. Since 8 trees had been removed to produce the firewood, and Patricia had taken approximately 1/16 of that wood, the theft amounted to about $3,000 in actual damages. But Colorado timber theft law was on our side. The statute allowed for treble damages, meaning 3 times the actual value, which brought Patricia's theft to $9,000 just for the wood she took. Add in legal fees, the cost of the arborist report, and punitive damages for her behavior as HOA president, and we were looking at a serious lawsuit. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement in January, offering to pay me $500 and have Patricia formally apologize. Rebecca advised me to reject it, and I did. This was not about the money anymore. It was about accountability. The case went to mediation in February, a standard step before trial. We sat in a conference room at a neutral law office with a mediator trying to facilitate an agreement. Patricia looked haggard and angry, refusing to make eye contact with me. Her lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 60s named Paul Gibson, tried to argue that Patricia had genuinely believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. Rebecca was having none of it. Your client stole property that was not hers. She admitted it on video. There is no legal interpretation where that is acceptable. She is not a government official with eminent domain. She is a volunteer HOA president who decided to take the law into her own hands. The mediator tried to find middle ground. Mr. Garrison, would you consider a settlement if Miss Henderson agreed to pay the full appraised value of the wood plus your legal costs? No, I said firmly. I want more than that. She needs to understand there are consequences for this kind of behavior. Patricia finally spoke, her voice dripping with contempt. This is absurd. It is a pile of firewood. You are destroying my reputation over kindling. You destroyed your own reputation when you stole my property, I shot back. I gave you multiple opportunities to back down. You chose to escalate at every turn. The mediation ended without an agreement, which meant we were going to trial. The trial was scheduled for April, giving both sides a few months to prepare. Rebecca warned me that trials were unpredictable and suggested one more time that I consider settling, but I was committed to seeing this through. In the meantime, the situation in Pine Valley had evolved. Several homeowners, emboldened by my lawsuit, started pushing back against Patricia's other questionable fines and decisions. Tom organized a petition to call a special homeowner vote to remove Patricia as HOA president. The petition needed signatures from 30% of homeowners, and it reached that threshold in less than 2 weeks. The special vote was held in March at the community center. Nearly every homeowner showed up, which was unprecedented. Patricia tried to defend her record, arguing that she had been enforcing the covenants fairly and consistently. But when Tom presented evidence of her selective enforcement and fabricated complaints, the mood turned against her. The vote was not even close. Patricia was removed as HOA president by a margin of 73-12. Linda Wu was elected as the new president, and Greg Marshall agreed to stay on as treasurer. One of the first actions the new board took was to formally condemn Patricia's theft of my firewood and to withdraw the HOA as a defendant in the lawsuit, acknowledging that Patricia had acted outside her authority. This was a significant development for the legal case. With the HOA no longer defending Patricia, she was on her own. Paul Gibson tried to withdraw as her lawyer, but the judge denied the motion because trial was so close. Patricia was forced to either continue with Gibson or represent herself. The trial began on April 15th. It was held in a small courtroom at the El Paso County Combined Courts building. Judge Margaret Foster presided, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. Rebecca presented our case methodically. She showed the video of Patricia taking the wood, introduced the arborist report detailing the value of the trees, and entered into evidence the HOA records showing Patricia had fabricated the complaints against me. She also called several neighbors as witnesses who testified about Patricia's pattern of abusive behavior as HOA president. Tom Chen gave particularly effective testimony. Patricia Henderson ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom, he said on the stand. She made up rules, selectively enforced covenants, and threatened anyone who challenged her. What she did to Nathan was just the most blatant example of behavior she had gotten away with for years. When it was Patricia's turn to present her defense, things fell apart quickly. Paul Gibson tried to argue that Patricia had acted in good faith, believing she had the authority to resolve what she perceived as a neighborhood issue. But under cross-examination from Rebecca, Patricia became defensive and combative. Miss Henderson, did you have permission to take firewood from Mr. Garrison's property? Rebecca asked. I did not need permission. I was resolving an HOA matter. But the HOA board had not authorized you to take any action, had they? Patricia hesitated. I had the authority as president to address covenant violations. But there was no covenant violation, was there? The board declined to issue a fine at the November meeting. The board was wrong. I knew it was a violation. So you took it upon yourself to override the board's decision and steal Mr. Garrison's property? I did not steal anything. I redistributed it. Without his permission and without legal authority. That is the definition of theft, Miss Henderson. Judge Foster watched this exchange with increasing skepticism. When Patricia finished testifying, the judge called a short recess, then returned with her ruling. I have heard enough, Judge Foster said. This is one of the clearer cases of theft I have encountered. Miss Henderson, regardless of your position as HOA president, you had absolutely no legal authority to take property that did not belong to you. Your assertion that you were acting within your HOA authority is not supported by any evidence. In fact, the evidence shows you were explicitly not authorized by the HOA board to take the action you took. She shuffled through some papers. I am ruling in favor of Mr. Garrison on all counts. Miss Henderson, you are ordered to pay Mr. Garrison $9,000 in treble damages for the timber value of the wood you stole, an additional $2,000 in compensatory damages for trespass and conversion, and you will be responsible for Mr. Garrison's legal fees, which I understand total approximately $15,000. That is a total judgment of $26,000. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Your Honor, I cannot possibly afford that. Judge Foster's expression did not soften. You should have considered that before you stole your neighbor's property. However, there is an alternative I am willing to consider. She looked at me. Mr. Garrison, you testified that the firewood came from 8 trees that were removed from your property, correct? Yes, Your Honor. Would you be willing to accept restitution in the form of Miss Henderson paying to have 8 equivalent trees planted on your property, in addition to a reduced cash payment? I had not expected this, but the idea appealed to me. Having mature trees replanted would actually be better than cash in the long run. Yes, Your Honor, I would accept that. Judge Foster nodded. Miss Henderson, here is my revised order. You will pay Mr. Garrison $5,000 in cash within 60 days. You will also hire a professional arborist to select, deliver, and plant 8 appropriate trees on Mr. Garrison's property, in locations he approves, within 90 days. The trees must be of sufficient size and quality to replace what was lost, and the arborist must provide a written guarantee that the trees will survive for at least 2 years. If you fail to comply with any part of this order, the full cash judgment of $26,000 will be enforceable immediately. Do you understand? Patricia nodded numbly. Yes, Your Honor. Good. This case is closed. I walked out of the courtroom feeling vindicated but also exhausted. Rebecca shook my hand. That went better than I expected. Judge Foster did not have to offer the tree replacement option. She clearly wanted to see real restitution rather than just a cash payment. I am glad she did. I actually prefer getting the trees back. Over the next 2 months, Patricia complied with the court order, though clearly resentfully. She paid the $5,000 within the required time frame, and she hired a reputable arborist company to handle the tree planting. The arborist, a man named David Murphy, came out to my property in late May. He was professional and knowledgeable, and we walked my land together discussing the best places to plant the new trees. He recommended a mix of ponderosa pines and Douglas firs, matching what had been removed, and suggested locations that would provide good shade and wind protection while filling in the gaps left by the dead trees. The trees arrived in early June. They were not fully mature, but they were substantial, each about 12 feet tall with healthy root systems. David's crew spent 2 days carefully planting them, adding proper soil amendments and setting up irrigation systems to ensure they would thrive. I was out there watching the whole process, and at one point David said, "Whoever is paying for this really got stuck with a bill. These are premium specimens. You are looking at about $3,000 per tree plus installation." It was court-ordered restitution, I explained. David raised his eyebrows. Ah, well, someone learned an expensive lesson. Patricia never showed up during the planting, which was fine with me. I had no desire to see her again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was planning to sell her house and move away, unable to face the embarrassment of losing the lawsuit and being removed as HOA president. The new HOA board under Linda Wu was functioning much better. They clarified the covenants to remove ambiguities, established a formal appeal process for any alleged violations, and made board meetings more transparent and accessible. Several people told me that the neighborhood felt noticeably less tense without Patricia's constant threats and power plays. By midsummer, the new trees were thriving. I watered them diligently and watched as they put out new growth, their needles a bright green in the Colorado sunshine. My remaining firewood, which I had now moved slightly closer to my house to make it even less visible from the street, had seasoned nicely, and I was using it regularly in my fireplace during cool evenings. Tom came over one Saturday in July for a barbecue, bringing his wife Susan and a case of local craft beer. We stood on my back deck, looking at the newly planted trees, and Tom raised his beer in a toast. "To standing up to petty tyrants," he said. "And to firewood," I added, and we clinked bottles. Susan, who had heard the whole story but was seeing the trees for the first time, shook her head in amazement. "I still cannot believe all this happened over firewood. It is like something out of a movie." "The scary part is how normal it felt at the time," I said. Patricia was so convinced she was in the right, even when she was literally stealing my property on camera. She had spent so long acting like HOA president gave her unlimited authority that she could not see how wrong she was. Tom nodded. That is what happens when small amounts of power go unchecked. She started with little things like complaining about Christmas lights, and when no one pushed back, she escalated. By the time she got to your firewood, she genuinely believed she could take whatever action she wanted. Well, I am just glad it is over, I said. And honestly, I am happy with how it turned out. I got my money, I got my trees back, and Patricia learned that actions have consequences. We spent the rest of the evening grilling steaks and enjoying the warm summer weather. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across my property, I looked at those 8 new trees and felt a sense of satisfaction. They were not just replacement trees. They were a reminder that standing up for your rights, even over something as simple as firewood, was worth the effort. The neighborhood continued to improve under the new HOA leadership. Linda Wu was responsive and reasonable, focusing on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. The holiday decoration contest that year was judged fairly. The neighborhood pool received much-needed repairs, and several common areas were landscaped beautifully. I heard one final update about Patricia in September. She had sold her house and moved to Aurora, a suburb of Denver, about an hour north. Someone said she had joined the HOA board in her new neighborhood within weeks of moving in. I felt sorry for her new neighbors, but figured they would have to fight their own battles. As for me, I continued living peacefully in Pine Valley. My trees grew taller and healthier with each passing season. I kept processing firewood from dead trees on my property, maintaining a neat stack that no one complained about anymore. I even built a small shed specifically for storing wood, partly for practical reasons and partly as a statement that I would not be bullied off my own land. The lawsuit became something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents would hear the story and sometimes walk by my house to see the famous firewood and the trees that were planted as court-ordered restitution. I became known as the guy who stood up to the crazy HOA president, which was not exactly the reputation I had set out to earn, but I did not mind. Years later, when people asked if I regretted suing Patricia or if I thought I had overreacted, I always gave the same answer. No, what she did was not just about firewood. It was about respect, property rights, and the rule of law. If I had let her get away with stealing my wood, she would have continued abusing her power, and other neighbors would have suffered. Sometimes the right thing to do is not the easy thing, and standing up to a bully, even when it costs time and money and stress, is always worth it. Those 8 trees stand on my property today, tall and strong, a living reminder that justice, though sometimes slow and expensive, is always worth pursuing. Every time I see them, I remember that cold November day when Patricia loaded my wood into her SUV, and I remember the moment in court when Judge Foster ruled in my favor. I remember the satisfaction of watching those trees being planted, knowing that Patricia was paying for every single one. And when I sit by my fireplace on cold winter nights, burning wood from my own trees, wood that I cut and stacked and earned, I know that I did the right thing. The firewood keeps me warm, the trees provide shade and beauty, and the principle stands firm. No one, not even an HOA president on a power trip, has the right to take what is not theirs. The Pine Valley neighborhood learned an important lesson through all of this. HOAs are supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. Board members are volunteers with limited authority, not dictators with unlimited power. And homeowners have rights that must be respected, regardless of covenants or bylaws or the personal opinions of whoever happens to be in charge. As I write this, those trees are now over 7 feet taller than when they were planted. They are part of my property's landscape, indistinguishable from the trees that were always there. In another decade, they will be fully mature, providing the same benefits that the original trees provided before the storm damaged them. And my firewood pile, it is still there, neatly stacked and covered, ready to keep me warm through another Colorado winter. No one has complained about it since Patricia left. The new HOA board has more important things to worry about, like maintaining common areas and organizing community events. You know, the things an HOA is actually supposed to do. I still see Tom regularly. We have become good friends through all of this, bonding over the shared experience of dealing with Patricia's reign of terror. He jokes that I should run for the HOA board myself, but I always decline. I have had enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. I am content to live peacefully on my property, burning my firewood, watching my trees grow, and knowing that I stood up for what was right when it mattered. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to. A wrong was committed, evidence was presented, and justice was served. Patricia had to pay real consequences for her actions, not just in money but in reputation and community standing. The court's decision to require tree replacement rather than just cash payment was particularly appropriate, creating a lasting reminder of what happened and genuine restitution for what was taken. Looking back on the whole experience, from that first confrontation in my garage to the day the last tree was planted, I realize how much I learned. I learned about property law and HOA regulations and timber valuation. I learned about the court system and how civil litigation actually works. But most importantly, I learned about standing firm when you know you are right, even when it would be easier to back down. Patricia Henderson thought she could bully me into giving up my firewood, or at least into accepting her authority to take it. She thought that being HOA president gave her power that superseded my property rights. She was wrong on every count, and she paid the price for that assumption. The firewood that started this whole mess is long since burned. Those particular logs provided warmth through 2 winters, and they are now just ash and memory. But the trees that replace them will stand for decades, maybe centuries. They are a permanent monument to a temporary conflict, a living reminder that doing the right thing, even when it is difficult, creates lasting positive change. And that, ultimately, is the real story here. Not about firewood or HOA disputes or court cases, but about the importance of standing up for your rights and holding people accountable when they abuse their power. It is about understanding that sometimes the smallest conflicts reveal the biggest principles, and that fighting for those principles, even over something as seemingly trivial as a pile of firewood, matters more than you might think. The neighborhood is better because I sued. The HOA is more accountable because Patricia faced consequences. And my property is more beautiful because 8 healthy trees now grow where there were once only empty spaces. That is not a bad outcome for a conflict that started with a middle-aged woman demanding I share my firewood and ended with a judge ordering her to replant my trees. Every fall, when I have new trees assessed and dead wood removed, I am careful to document everything. I keep receipts, take photos, and maintain clear records. Not because I expect another Patricia Henderson to come along, but because I learned that protecting your rights means protecting your documentation. I am prepared now in a way I was not before, and that preparation itself is valuable. The firewood I have stacked today came from 3 trees removed last autumn. They were damaged in a late spring hailstorm, and my arborist recommended removal. The wood is seasoning nicely, covered and protected, exactly where my original stack stood. And if anyone has a problem with it, well, I have a lawyer's number saved in my phone and a court case I already won to use as precedent. But no one complains. The neighborhood has moved on. Linda Wu runs the HOA with competence and fairness. Property values have actually increased since Patricia left, probably because people feel more comfortable living here without the constant threat of arbitrary fines and harassment. The community is stronger, more united, and more functional than it has been in years. And I have 8 beautiful trees growing on my property, paid for by the woman who tried to steal from me, planted by court order and thriving under Colorado's bright sun. Every time I look at them, I smile, not with smugness or vindictiveness, but with satisfaction. Justice was served. The right thing happened. And I learned that sometimes, standing your ground over something as simple as firewood can change an entire community for the better. That is the real lesson here. Never underestimate the importance of standing up for what is right, even in small matters. Because small matters, left unchallenged, become big problems. Patricia Henderson was not stopped by the first person she bullied or the 10th. She was stopped by someone who finally said enough is enough and was willing to back up that statement with action. I hope I never have to sue anyone again. It was stressful, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. But I would do it again in a heartbeat if the circumstances required it. Some things are worth fighting for, and property rights, personal dignity, and accountability are among them. The firewood was just the catalyst. The real fight was about something much bigger, and winning that fight made all the difference.